Alright, today we're going to talk about social credit scores. Social credit scores, for most people, are considered sort of a dystopian nightmare hellscape. That seems to be true kind of across the political spectrum, right? If you talk to people on the right, I would argue that they have sort of conspiratorial ideas about social credit scores a lot of times. But they're very, very anti-social credit scores. They view it as the globalists or the liberal elites are trying to control us. So they're given social credit scores where if you act out of line, they're going to lower your social credit score. And you can see why that would contribute to a number of things conservatives are already against. The deplatforming of conservatives from social media would now be probably linked to a social credit score. The general political correctness, cancel culture, you could get canceled and it would lower your social credit score as well because people just dislike you for speaking the truth, right? And then on the left, there's an additional set of critiques, right? Because it's kind of capitalism-y, a social credit score. You could relate it even to just a normal credit score. I actually think this is a pretty interesting way to think about it is by looking at a normal credit score, right? Normal credit scores do keep track of you quite a bit, actually. We don't talk about it much, but our banks keep a pretty significant track of us. They're paying attention to everything we're buying and, whether we're making our payments on time. And they're basically trying to ask themselves, based on our income, our job history, whether we're making payments, how responsible we are. And that's a very human, sort of untouchable thing. It's sort of a vague thing, responsibleness, to be tracked by an institution. But that's what they're doing. They're tracking your responsibleness to figure out whether or not you can pay back loans effectively or not, as well as just your poorness, I guess, your responsibleness and how poor you are, which are seen as kind of two sides of the same coin, right? Because if you're rich, then you can be a bit irresponsible, and you're probably going to consistently make your payments anyways. So this, you can see already why there would be a left-wing critique of this. For one thing, the left generally seems to dislike incentives. That might be kind of a controversial thing to say. They seem to dislike meritocracy. They don't love people getting rewarded for doing good and punished for doing bad. I think they're mostly concerned with the punishment end of things. They're getting punished for doing bad. But it does still end up that they're against sort of incentives generally, right? And the way that this plays out is in a desire for more egalitarianism and for more sympathy for the people at the bottom, and in more creation of opportunities for people, right? So a left-wing person might be very upset, for example, with the ways that social credit scores punish black people disproportionately. As a result of a history of racism and wealth inequality in this country, black people often end up with a lack of inherited wealth, and that lack of inherited wealth contributes to poor financial data on them. They end up having lower credit scores, and that makes it harder for them to get access to loans. So even if they're hardworking and trying to get loans and trying to move up in the world, this is a barrier to them doing so. So there are a lot of left-wing advocates for reforms to credit scores. Joe Biden actually passed some sort of a reform when he was in office. I don't remember the details of that one off the top of my head, but he was changing the way credit scores work to try and improve them and make them a little bit fairer. And there are lots of people on the left who want to just abolish credit scores outright. They just think that it shouldn't be a thing. They think that you shouldn't have to prove that you're worthy of an opportunity for a loan, that you should be able to go to the bank and everybody gets an equal opportunity for a loan. And some people pay them back really efficiently, and some people don't. But the bank just inputs that risk into the cost of the loan universally, right? That would probably be what happens if you get rid of credit scores. So if you think about this, you could see why the left is against credit scores and by extension against social credit scores. And there's also, of course, privacy concerns and other more human concerns about credit scores that make them seem like a very dystopian thing. People are going to keep track of your behavior more, and so that raises a lot of privacy concerns. I'm going to play devil's advocate, I guess, for a minute here, and say, what if credit scores either are good or could be good? Social credit scores, I should say. If we think of them through the lens of credit scores, through the lens of tracking responsibility, you could see a lot of positive aspects of that, actually, right? Like, it's maybe a good thing to keep track of who's responsible and who's not, and reward responsible payment and punish irresponsibility. Like, maybe that's a good incentive structure for our society, and it encourages good behavior from individuals, and maybe it's good to have incentive structures that encourage good behavior. I definitely feel like there are a lot of incentive structures in our society that encourage bad behavior, so having one that encourages good behavior every once in a while might actually be kind of nice. And I'm still thinking about it systemically, which I think is a very left-wing or Marxist thing to do most of the time, to be like, well, let's not talk about people and individuals, let's not talk about personal responsibility so much, let's talk about what our society is encouraging from people, what our political systems are incentivizing us to do financially, right? From this perspective, a social credit score could actually be kind of cool, right? To be using money and financial incentives to encourage people to do smaller, more human things in more microscopic ways than we're able to do right now. I actually think the idea of a social credit score gets at something that the state has been unable to do for a long time. The authority of the state is very top-down, it's very blanket, it's very one-size-fits-all. So what the government does when it enacts a policy is very lacking in the depthful information about the personal circumstances of each individual person and the depth of the reality of their life. That's actually one of the biggest critiques of government from like libertarians and free market advocates, is that big government lacks good information, whereas markets, which are these sort of decentralized, spontaneous things, have a lot more depthful information on people's lives because it's getting information directly from individual people's consumption choices. So a social credit score, something like that, could be a way in which we could remake government so that there are aspects of collective decision-making, decisions that we've made as a society collectively that we want to encourage out of every individual, that actually have the depth of knowledge and information on individuals necessary to really be an effective policy. And I think it could also be, in a lot of ways, more empathetic and more understanding if we build it correctly. Let's go back to the example I gave before of African American people having a disproportionate lack of access to financial capital, not because of anything to do with their personal behavior, but simply because of their race and their history. That is a factor of depth that might be more known to a community of human beings who knows a person than to a bank trying to just track if you're making your payments on time. Right? Other human beings can see whether or not you work hard during the day. They can see whether or not you're making an effort to improve yourself, whether or not you're trying to move up in the world. They can see whether or not you have like a personal responsibility sort of an attitude. I'm not trying to impose a grind set on all of my audience necessarily, but they can see whether or not you're behaving positively, and they might be able to distinguish more depthfully than a social credit score. So that's one of the things, is that there are what you might call technologies of authority. That's what I kind of call them in my head. Technologies that allow systems that we already have, whether they're run by private institutions like banks, or they're run by governments like the police, or for example, there are technologies that allow you to understand on a deeper level what is going on, and with that better, more detailed information, authority can act while making fewer errors and while being more helpful.